Hello, it's Mr. Mulvey again with another science video. This one is about genetics. By the time you finish this video, you should be able to define genes, alleles, dominant alleles, recessive alleles, genotype, and phenotype. You should also be able to explain how dominant alleles affect recessive alleles, and explain how genotype affects phenotype. I know that sounds like a lot, but are you ready? Alright, well let's go. If you have not yet watched my video on Gregor Mendel, I would suggest that you stop watching this one and go and watch that one. If not, you might not understand all the examples that I use in this video. Well, if you're still here, I'm going to assume that you have watched that video, so let's go ahead and get started. In Mendel's first experiment, he bred a purebred tall plant with a purebred short plant, and the offspring all ended up tall. So what Mendel had discovered were that traits were controlled by individual factors. These factors are now known as genes, or factors that control traits. He also had determined that there were different forms of genes. We now call those alleles, which are defined as different forms of the same gene. So basically what Mendel studied in his experiment were tall forms of genes, or tall alleles, and short forms of genes, which are short alleles. So these vocabulary words also relate to humans, and let's take a look at the trait of eye color, the base eye color. So in humans, there is a brown form for the base eye color, or a brown allele, and a blue form, which is called a blue allele. So what Mendel saw in his plants were two tall alleles in the purebred tall parent, and two short alleles in the purebred short parent. Those were those two individual factors for each of those plants. The offspring of those two parents received one tall allele from the purebred tall parent and one short allele from the purebred short parent. The offspring are known as hybrid. Hybrid means that they have two different alleles for a trait. So a tall form and a short form are two different forms. Mendel then took the offspring and allowed them to self-pollinate. So basically, we were crossing a hybrid tall plant with a hybrid tall plant. And what he saw every time he did that cross was that the offspring would come out as 3/4 tall and 1/4 short. So that short trait had returned. Mendel wondered how. Well, let's take a look at the genetics behind it. Alright, so parent 1, as a hybrid, had one tall allele and one short allele. Parent 2, also as a hybrid, also had a tall allele and a short allele. So let's see how these could combine in different ways. So if parent 1 passed down one tall allele, and parent 2 also handed down its tall allele, we would end up with this combination of alleles. But parent 1 could hand down the tall allele, and parent 2 could hand down a short allele, leading to this combination. Or parent 1 could contribute a short allele, while parent 2 contributes a tall allele, leading to this combination. And then there's one more. Both parents contribute a short allele, leading to this combination. So two tall alleles obviously would mean that that plant would be tall. Tall and short, believe it or not, actually means tall as well. Short and short obviously means short. So why is it that tall and short equals a tall plant? Well, it comes down to something known as a dominant allele. Now, the dominant allele is the form of a gene whose trait always shows in an organism whenever it is present. Now, we have a dominant allele here in the tall allele. That is the dominant allele. So since it is present in this organism, it will actually be a tall plant. Now, a recessive allele, by contrast, is the form of a gene whose trait is hidden whenever a dominant allele is present. So in pea plants, short is recessive. So we have a short allele, and it is covered up by this dominant tall allele, which is why we don't see short. We see a tall offspring in this case. So what do you think of when you hear the word dominant? So let's think about that for a minute. I tend to think of sports. So we have some various types of sports teams and sports individuals. So football, soccer, baseball, basketball, hockey, golf, tennis, race car, and fighting. So like MMA. Alright? So when you hear that a sports team or an individual is a dominant team or the dominant player, what do you think of? Well, I tend to think of the team or the person that wins the most. And that's exactly what a dominant allele is. Whenever the recessive allele is there with the dominant allele wins. That's the trait we see. So let's look at a couple more vocabulary words to try and reinforce this concept of dominant versus recessive alleles. So first we have a genotype. Now a genotype is an organism's genetic makeup. You see that word gene right there. It's almost like it says gene type. Okay, so another way to think of that is the combination of alleles. The phenotype means that that is an organism's visible traits. It's what you can actually see. Okay, so going back to dominant alleles. A dominant allele is represented always by a capital letter. So in the case of tall in pea plants, the tall allele is dominant, so it's represented by a capital T. Recessive alleles, on the other hand, are always represented by a lowercase letter. So in the case of pea plants, once again, the short allele is recessive, and it is represented by a lowercase t. So let's look at the genotype for a hybrid. So a hybrid has two different alleles. In this case, we have one tall and one short. So that genotype would be represented by a capital T and a lowercase t. The phenotype that that would make is a tall plant. The reason why it's tall? We have a dominant tall allele present, so it covers up the short one. It's like the short allele never even showed up. How does the genotype of an organism relate to its phenotype? Well, let's take a look at those two words. They obviously have a lot in common because they rhyme. So, let's take a look at them. So, genotype controls the phenotype. Remember that genotype is made up of the alleles. The phenotype is what you can see. So, the alleles actually control the traits. Genotype controls phenotype. So if an organism, a human, has a brown allele, which brown is dominant for brown eyes, and a blue allele, which is recessive, that organism would have brown eyes. So a brown allele and a blue allele is the genotype, big B, little b. And the fact that that human has brown eyes, that's the phenotype. It's what you can see. So, thanks again for watching. Please stay tuned for more of my fabulous science videos.